Hello everybody and welcome back to another ESO Guides video with me, Sherman. Today we're going to be talking about weapons and weapon skills and their passives and what they can do for you depending on what weapon choice you decide to run with. So let's go ahead and get in here and look at the weapon skills. Now weapon skills do have a lot of benefits depending on what kind of thing you're trying to do. If you want to go for the best DPS you can for melee, you go dual wield. If you want to go for best range DPS as melee, you're going to go bow. Now, Sword and Shield is a good tanking set, so is two-handed, and the reason I say these two work really well together is because of the things they can benefit you with being a tank. Where Dual Wield does give you a beneficial thing to be a tank, Bow can give you something beneficial for being a tank, Destruction Staffs definitely give you something beneficial for being a tank, and then of course Resto Staffs as well. So you can tank with any weapon, you can play damage dealers with any weapon, and you can also heal using any weapon type. Resto Staff is the best for healing, just like Destruction Staff is the best for magic damage, and Dual Wield is the best for melee damage. And the reason I say Dual Wield is best because it gives you greater burst damage versus two-handed and sword and board. You still can use those. So we're going to start with the two-handed, of course. It's already high, the one that's picked. So starting off, they get Berserker Strike for an ultimate. Now you do have to build up to earn this. You have to be rank 50 with the weapon, so that means you have to be max out with it in order to learn this ability. And what it does is it strikes an enemy with a vicious blow, doing a lot of physical damage based on your max stamina and max weapon damage. So you can increase that with things like Major Brutality and other stuff. Now on top of that, this attack ignores the target's mitigation and grants you physical and spell resistance equal to the amount of ignored for 8 seconds. So it's basically like putting a damage shield on your character, because it gives you both physical and spell resistance equal to whatever they had to you, giving you greater resistances. It costs 150 ultimate, so it doesn't take much to get this. Now it does have two morphs. The first one is Onslaught, and this one basically what it does is killing an enemy with this ability immediately refunds the ultimate cost. So this is a good finisher move. Excuse me, guys. So you can use this ability to finish off the enemy, and when you do, you're going to get your ultimate back. So as long as they have about 10-15k health, depending on what your crit chance is, how much stamina and weapon damage you have, you can use this ability to end an enemy, and it doesn't cost you anything. The next one's Berserker's Rage. Now this is a really good one for a tank, somebody wanting to be more tanky, because it gives you immunity to all disabling, snare, and immobilization effects for the duration of this effect, of the mitigation, of that thing that steals their physical and spell resistance and gives it to you. So you get that 8 seconds of immunity from all that stuff as well. It's a really good one to use for tanking, like I said, so it's up to you, though, the way you choose to play on what two of these abilities you want to go with. Next, you have Cleave. Now, Cleave is a really great ability because it's more of an AoE bleed ability. Now, it does AoE damage up front, and it does a bleed over time, so it's a really good ability to use to start with. So like when you go charging into your enemies, if you're using your gap closer or whatever, you can charge in with this, then use Cleave. Then you don't have to worry about it because you have that damage on them over time, and you can use other abilities. The other thing that they get is they get two morphs, and both morphs grant benefits to you either way. Now, if you're running Carve, you have a way of building more ultimate, because what it does is it grants you minor heroism, increasing your ultimate generation by 9 seconds. So for 9 seconds, you get 1.5 extra ultimate per second, or you get one ultimate every 1.5 seconds for 9 seconds. So basically, every 3 seconds, you get 2. So you get 4, 6, 8 of them. Yeah, 8 ultimate extra per thing. Now whenever you do a light or heavy attack, you generate ultimate as well over 9 seconds. So this is a way to generate more, and it's a really good builder for your ultimate. Now remember, if you're playing a DPS character and you're using a two-handed, you're going to build ultimate faster, and you're going to have the opportunity using this or using something out of like the Fighters Guild called Dawnbreaker. So you get that greater damage potential from either one. Now, you also get Brawler, the choice of Brawler. Now, Brawler gives you a damage shield based on your max stamina and your max weapon damage. Now, it does the damage it does the direct damage and the bleed over time, but it also does an absorption shield that is based on that, like I said, the max damage, max weapon damage, And then for each enemy hit, it grows by 100%. So if you hit 5 enemies, and let's say it's a 4K shield, you're going to get a massive damage shield with that. So you have a choice there of what you want to go with, more ultimate or a damage shield. Next, you have critical charge. Now, critical charge is a really good ability because it gives you a gap closer, and it's always considered a critical strike. So no matter what, you're going to get the maximum damage out of this ability. Now, you have 2 morphs with this. The first one is Stampede, and this one reduces the enemy's movement speed by 60% on top of doing the damage on the critical strike. Next is Critical Rush, and this one deals more damage based on the distance you travel. So the further you are away, the more damage it'll do up front. Now, as a tank, you can choose to take either of these. As DPS, you can choose to take either of these. It's all up depending on how you choose to play. As a tank, though, I would prefer to use this one to reduce the movement speed of the enemy I hit first, and then use Critical Strike or Critical Rush if I was playing a DPS. The next one is Uppercut. Now, Uppercut is a massive damage dealing ability. Now, it is not an execute. It is just one that does a really big amount of damage. Dizzying Swing is one of the morphs, and the morph does stuns and knocks back the enemy when hit. Now, this is better for a tank type person to use if you want to get the some extra damage in there and also stun enemies and knock them back. This is a great ability to use. It doesn't cost a lot of stamina when you have stamina reduction, so you can use this ability. Wrecking Blow is more of a better for tanks because it gives you Empower. But on top of that, it doesn't do the knockback and it doesn't do the stun. So it just gives you that ability to do that Empower where your next attack is increased by 20%. Now, this is super beneficial because I'm going to show you something that you can do with this Empower that's going to make your character do a lot more damage if you do the right rotation. So next is Reverse Slice. Now, Reverse Slice is considered a finisher, or I forget I already said it earlier. Sorry, guys. I'm like going brain stupid right now. But what this does is you spin around and strike an enemy down, dealing X physical damage. Deals up to 300% more damage when they're below 50% health. Now, this is a great finisher move because once they're down below 50% health, you get increased damage potential. Now, you get 2 options. You get the 2 morphs are Reverse Slice and Executioner, or Reverse Slice and Executioner. Now, Reverse Slice is a really good ability if you want to do more AoE damage. So you can get more AoE damage when you do this because you hit 2 other enemies. 2 other nearby enemies take a percentage of the damage inflicted to the primary, and then they take 59% of the damage. Now, that damage can be increased depending on how you have your champion points set up. So you can get greater AoE damage and get an execute on that one enemy. So that's what is an execute. So you do get that. Now, Executioner Strike increases the amount of damage you do when the enemy's below 50% health. So you get 350% instead of 300% more damage. So it's your choice on which one you want to play. You can use these as a tank, but it's better for DPS. Now, this is one that is good for anyone. Now, even if your class has an option for Major Brutality, this is better. And the reason I say this is better is because it also gives you a heal over time that lasts the length of the duration of this bonus weapon damage. And you can also fire it in succession. So you can fire it once to get the initial Major Brutality, fire it again to get a greater heal over time. So it works either way. Now, you do have 2 morphs with this. You have one that's reduced cost and provides a brief immunity to snares and immobilizations. Now, this is the ability that I would suggest going with if I was a tank, and if I was DPS, I would go with Rally. And the reason I say that is because if you're playing a tank and you're going to be doing, tanking up front, this one reduces the cost provided and brief immunity to snares and immobilizations. So if you do get snared or immobilized, you can use this ability. It's going to recast that heal over time, and it's going to make you immune to snares and immobilization for a certain amount of time, which gives you greater maneuverability in combat. So it's a better thing for that. Now, right now, personally, I'm running Rally on my Templar, and that's because it does give you a final heal when it expires, and if you're like trying to get to another fight in a dungeon or in a trial or something, you can keep moving and you're going to get that heal over time, and when it wears off, you're going to get a bigger heal. But it's not really beneficial to you. it's better for DPS because they're going to be doing, you know, casting this once and then focusing on doing damage, and that allows them to focus on damage, getting a small tick heal, and it is based on your max weapon damage and max, you know, this heal is based on your max stamina and max weapon damage. So it's going to be bigger for them in that sense when they first fire it off. For a tank, you're not going to have as much stamina possibly, so you got to make up the difference by doing this. So this is, like I said, this is better for tanks because it gives you greater maneuverability in the fight. On top of that, their first passive is Forceful. Now this one at rank 2, your light and heavy attacks damage up to 2 nearby enemies for 25% of the damage you inflict on the primary target. Now that damage can be increased, again, through champion points and other stuff, so that 25% will grow based on the amount of damage that you do in the initial target. So if you hit the initial target with a critical for 20k, let's say, that means that 25%, the heavy attack is going to do 25k. That means you're going to do 5 to 6k to those enemies to the side. So it's really an effective thing to use. And it allows you to weave in light and heavy attacks, hitting multiple targets as well. Now heavy weapons, this is what I call the bread and butter of this tree. And that's because each weapon type you use, whether it's a sword, an axe, or a mace, you're going to get different benefits. Using a sword, you increase your damage done by 5%. Now remember, you're going to have 20% in one thing in your champion points and 10% in the other. So you're going to get a total of 25% extra damage, or 35% extra damage because of this. And if you're if you have poison on your sword, you're going to get that poison damage plus this other effect if you're playing like a DK, or your fire damage if you're playing a DK. If you're a Sork, you have lightning damage on there. You get that extra damage potential. So it increases not only the damage that you do, but it also gives you that extra 5% shock damage as well. And you get extra 5% physical damage as a Sork. As a flame tank or whatever, using a two-handed, you're going to get that extra fire damage on there. And then you can get that extra poison damage on there. So either way you go with that, you have that option. Now Balance Blade is another really cool one because it reduces the cost of your two-handed abilities and stamina by 20%. So if you're playing in medium armor, you're going to get a 15% already. So you're going to get 30% reduced cost in all these abilities, or 35% reduced cost. So all you have to do is kick it up another 5%, like I said, and you're going to get 40% reduced cost in your two-handed abilities. So it's easier to focus on these abilities than your class abilities, and you can use these more often. The next one is Follow-Up. Now, Follow-Up is that ability I was talking about earlier, where you can do a rotation with, with the Wrecking Blow. You start off with Wrecking Blow, you hit them with this. It's going to grant you Empower, which is going to increase the damage of your next attack by 20%. Well, if you do a heavy attack, your heavy attack is going to do 35% damage if you're using a two-handed, or it's going to do 30% more damage. Well, that heavy attack is now going to be increased because of that Empower by 20 extra percent. So you do Wrecking Blow, heavy attack, Wrecking Blow. Because now Wrecking Blow is going to be increased by 10%. So you can rotate those abilities, doing greater damage with a three-way rotation like that. And then by that time, you're going to go right into Executioner Strike or Reverse Slice, because you're going to have done enough damage to them to do that. So that means when you come out of that last Wrecking Blow, this is going to be increased not only by 350%, but 370% damage. So that's why I use that rotation when I play a DPS with the two-handed. Now, Battle Rush is another one that's really good, because whenever you kill an enemy, you get 30% stamina recovery. So that means whenever you do a heavy attack after you kill an enemy, you're going to get greater resources back from the enemy the next enemy you hit. It's going to allow you for greater resource management. And it lasts for 10 seconds after you kill the enemy. So you get that 30% for 10 seconds. So within that 10-second time, you can, like if you're fighting a boss that has ads, if you're a tank, you kill you keep tanking that boss, but you turn to that smaller enemy, you kill it, you get that 30%, you do a couple heavy attacks on the boss, you get your resources built up so you can use other abilities. And that is the two-handed, guys. That's how the two-handed can work, and that's how you can make it work for you. Now, you have a lot of different advantages from using a two-handed versus other weapons. The next one we're going to be looking at is the sword and board, which is the bread and butter of tanking right now, according to the meta. Now, it is a really great weapon choice to use, depending on the class you're playing. For a Templar, it is not a good choice to use. And the reason I say that it's not a good choice is because you do not get that major brutality. So if you can get major brutality on your character, this would be more beneficial to you. And I'll explain why. So their ultimate is Shield Wall. Now, Shield Wall reinforces your shield, allowing you to automatically block all attacks at no cost for 6 seconds. It doesn't say that you can't continue to block effects. You just can't block you're automatically blocking the damage. So you can still use your shield to block stuns and knockbacks and stuff from bosses. And it's not going to cost you any stamina. So you get that benefit there. Now you get 2 morphs with this. You get Spell Wall and you get Shield Discipline. Now either one you go with is going to be good, regardless. This one, you also reflect all projectiles cast at you. So it doesn't matter. You will reflect all magic and arrow attacks cast at you for that duration. So that's super beneficial. On top of that, you get Shield Discipline, which your one-handed sword and shield abilities cost are reduced as cost by 100% while active. So while this is 8, it's actually greater because this grows based on your stamina, the amount of seconds too. So this right here is reduced to by 100%. So if you wanted to use Puncture or Pierce Armor or Ransack, it wouldn't cost you anything. None of these abilities would cost you anything. The next one ability you get is Puncture. Now Puncture is the taunt that the sword and board gets. So it deals damage and it taunts the enemy for 15 seconds. It also applies Major Fracture. Now depending on the player, this is really good because it will give you that. Now if you're using a reinforced shield, you're going to get greater resistance from that than you will from using an infused shield. So it allows you to actually take a sharpened weapon if you want, so that way you can get increased damage potential with your character running sword and board. Now, you get 2 morphs. One is Ransack, the other is Pierce Armor. Now, Ransack is really good for somebody who doesn't get a really good physical resistance somewhere. This gives them minor resolve, increasing their physical resistance by 1,200 and by 1,350. So you get that extra physical resistance, which can be beneficial to you because your spell resistance is usually higher than your physical resistance. So you do get that. Now the next morph, Pierce Armor, gives you Major Fracture and Major Breach. So it allows you physical and spell resistance. And this is what most tanks go with because not a lot of people use those kind of abilities from their class or from their that kind of thing. Like I said, that Pierce, like the marking targets from Nightblade and the Spirit or the Power of the Light from the Templar. A lot of people don't use those kind of things because they're like, oh, the tank's going to do it for me. Well, not all tanks run Pierce Armor. A lot of them do run Ransack, a lot more than you think. So you're not getting that spell penetration. You're only getting that Major Fracture. So you're not getting any spell penetration whatsoever. They're getting the physical penetration. Now, the next ability, Low Slash, is one of the better abilities for minor maim. But it only hits a single target. So what it does is you surprise the enemy with a deep lunge, dealing X physical damage and reducing their movement speed by 60% for 12 seconds. On top of that, you get Minor Maim. Now, Minor Maim reduces their damage done by 15% for 12 seconds. Now, they get the greatest amount of Minor Maim out of anything in the game. Just remember that. So, they have 2 morphs with this. You have Deep Slash and you have Heroic Slash. Now, if you're playing a class that doesn't build ultimate very fast, using Heroic Slash is a benefit because it does give you more ultimate. But Deep Slash is a little bit better in opposite regards. Now, if you're playing a DK or you're playing a Templar, you're not going to use Heroic Slash. You're going to use Deep Slash instead. And the reason why I say this is because this one hits multiple targets. You hit up to 2 additional targets near the enemy. So if you're in a trial or a dungeon or something and you've got multiple enemies, you can hit more enemies with this, giving them minor maim, reducing the damage they do by 15%. On top of that, it does a bleed as well. So you get that damage up front, and then you get damage, you get damage up front, and then you get that damage to the other targets as well. So you get two damage types, and the damage you do to the other targets, sorry, it's not a bleed, it's damage to other targets. And it does do smaller damage, but you still get that chance of doing that extra damage on them. And depending on what kind of race you are, and how much stamina you have, and how much other stuff you have, you can get this to be a really DPS-y type of build. Now this is better for Nightblades and Sorks, because they don't have a way of generating ultimate really fast. Now Nightblades do. They can get 2 ultimate for whenever they use a thing, but Sorks don't get that. Sorks get a reduced cost in ultimate. So this would be something that you could go with. And even as playing a Templar or DK, you could go with the Heroic Slash if you want to build more ultimate. But I can guarantee you're going to be building it really fast anyways. Now you got Defensive Stance. Now this is one that when you equip it, it's something you slot on both bars. And the reason you're going to slot it on both bars is because while it's slotted, it increases your block by 8% and reduces the cost by 8%. So you get that dual thing there. Now bolstering your defenses reflecting the next spell projectile also helps you, because then you can reflect it back at the enemy, doing damage back to the enemy. Now it does have 2 morphs. It has Defensive Stance and it has Absorb Magic. Now Defensive Stance does the same thing as this one, but instead it reflects projectiles and also stuns the enemy. So it does it with multiple projectiles, multiple things, and it reflects it back, doing damage to them and stunning them. It also still gets that 8% block increase and reduced cost. So that's why I said you're going to keep it on both bars. Next is Absorb Magic. This one bolsters your defenses, absorbing up to X damage from your next projectile cast at you, and healing you for 15% of your max health. So this one is built on max stamina. So it will be bigger the greater stamina pool you have. Now I see this a lot of times when I see tank build videos where they have like a 15k health and they have this on their bar, and it does like 8k damage. You know, it absorbs 8k damage. That's really not worth it when you can get 18k by putting more stamina into your character. That's why I tell people when you make a tank, if you're running Sword and Board, don't use Absorb Magic if you're playing a DK or you're playing a Templar or you're playing something that has a damage shield already, because the magic damage shield is going to be better for you if you're playing with more magicka than you are stamina, because it's going to give you a greater effect. This won't help you much. Now this one does have a longer time limit. It lasts for 30 seconds and it is the longest lasting damage shield in the game. Now the next one is Shield Charge. Now this is a gap closer. It's also a great damage dealing thing depending on how you use it. So you get to rush the enemy and ram them, dealing X physical damage and stunning them for 2 seconds. Now a lot of people don't like this because it does cost a lot of stamina. But remember, this right here, you're going to be using once, maybe twice in an encounter. It just depends. Now it gets 2 morphs. It gets Shielded Assault and it gets Invasion. Now Shielded Assault gives you a damage shield when you strike. And that damage shield is increased by max stamina and weapon damage. So if you hit somebody, you're going to get a damage shield. So you get that initial survivability to where you can do that. You can do your taunt and then you can hit them with Deep Slash. And then by that time the shield's gone and you can go right to blocking. So it's a really beneficial thing. Now if you're going to play a block tank, running Sword and Board is really good because it gives you a lot of advantages when blocking, and I'll get to that in a minute. Evasion though is the stun's longer based on the distance traveled. So the further you are away, the longer the stun is going to last, and it's going to last up to 88% longer. Now that is also beneficial because it offers you the same benefit. It stuns the enemy, but if it's a boss, it will not affect them. That's why I run Shielded Assault personally myself versus Evasion or Invasion. Next, you get Power Bash. Now a lot of people don't like using Power Bash. I love using Power Bash. Strike the enemy with full force with your shield, dealing physical damage and stunning them for 3 seconds. This helps on casters a lot, because you don't realize casters can hit for a lot of damage. So you can stun them for 3 seconds and allow your DPS to get to them and do damage. Now you got 2 morphs. You got Reverberating Bash, and as you can see, this applies Major Defile for by 30% for 10 seconds. So this is not quite as long as some of the other classes out there that can get greater amounts of time on theirs, but it does last for 10 seconds, and it's something that comes with the sword and board. So it's a stamina-based ability. It's something that you're going to equip, and it works great against bosses. Now the next one is even better. Now this applies Major Defile. I'll admit it's really great, but if your class does it, you don't need this. You're going to go with Power Slam. The reason you're going to go with Power Slam is strike your enemy with full force with your shield, dealing X physical damage and stunning for up to 3 seconds. While slotted, blocking an attack increases the damage of your next Power Slam by 25% for 5 seconds. So that gives you more damage when you block an attack and then you Power Slam, because that damage is going to be increased by 25%. On top of that, the damage here is increased by your stamina and your max weapon damage and your champion points. So this thing can hit really hard depending on how big your stamina pool is. Now we're going to get into the passives, and the first passive is Fortress. Now at rank 2, this thing reduces the cost of one-handed sword and shield abilities by 10% and reduces the blocking, or the cost of blocking, by 36%. So running this with this up here, you're going to get a greater block reduction or cost. It's almost 40, it's over 40%. So you get that 40%, then you use your champion points to get it up to 50%. And that's all you need, is 50% block cost reduction. Because blocking costs you 2,000 and something. So you cut that in half, yeah, it's not going to cost you as much stamina. It's like 1,000 stamina. If you have like a 30k stamina, you're not going to notice it, honestly. Next is Sword and Board. Sword and Board increases your weapon damage by 5%. And the amount of damage you can block by 20%. Now remember, a Dragon Knight gets 5% weapon damage when they use their igneous weapons, which gives them 20% weapon damage. In total, they get 30% extra weapon damage. So it becomes super beneficial to a DK running Sword and Board as a tank, because you get 30% extra weapon damage. And they are the only class who can get that 30% weapon damage, unless you're playing a Sork and you have 2 storm abilities on each bar. Then you can get 4% extra weapon damage added to that. So you can get 29% weapon damage, or you can get 30 weapon damage from them. So Sorks and Dragon Knights are the best with Sword and Board, no lie. Hands down the best, because they get the most damage potential with it. They get the most greater effects with it. Now you got to remember what I showed you guys up here. If you're using this Shielded Assault, this shield grows based on max stamina and weapon damage. This grows on max stamina and weapon damage. This isn't like based on your health. This is based on your stamina and weapon damage. The damage shield is. So it's better to go with that than it is to go anything else. Now remember, if you're going to be running Sword and Board as a DK, you're going to be using a lot more of these abilities than you are your own class abilities. And the reason why is because you're more of a stamina person running Sword and Board than you are running that. Now if you're running a Magicka-based person, I wouldn't even use Sword and Board, and there's a reason for that, and I'll get to that when I get to the stabs here in a minute. So you also get Deadly Bash. Now this is a really great one because it improves your standard bash attacks. Bashing does 100% more damage. Now you got to think, that's 100% more damage. So you add that with what you get from the damage, your damage bonus in your champion points, which is a 20% increase. That's 120% more damage when you bash a target. Now the bash is holding your block and then pressing your attack button. That's a bash. And it's cost 40% less. Now remember, you're going to have 10% probably reduced cost in stamina. So that's going to be 50% less cost when you bash somebody. And it hardly costs anything to bash anybody anyways, so it's going to be 50% less, making it more effective for you. Next is deflect bolts. Now this one is really cool because it increases the amount of damage you can block from projectiles and ranged attacks by 15%. Now this 15% gets added to this 20%, so that it comes out to a total of 35%. Now you also get an extra 10% in there. If you guys didn't know this, even running sword and board, you still get that normal 10% blocking even without it. So you get a total, in total, you get 35% this way, but 40%, 45% in actuality. So you can block more damage with this. Now, Templars get 15% blocking of melee damage, and DKs get 10% blocking damage across the board. So they don't get just this 30%, you know, that 40%. They get 90, they can block 95% of the damage coming in. So that's something to understand. Now, melee damage, they only get 10%, so it's 85 or whatever. When they block, they block so much. You know, you get what I mean. My math's a little off. I'm sorry. So you get a greater blocking. But if you also add your resistances to it as well, you can get some great blocking in there. Now, running sword and board does not mean that you have to have 32k resistances. You can tank with sword and board having 25k resistances and not even using the buff to buff yourself to give you greater resistances. And you can tank most dungeons and normal, hard mode, or normal, vet, and hard mode dungeons easily like that. Now, I would advise you to wear something with resistances if you're going into like getting greater resistances using your buff and everything when you're in trials. But it's not necessarily something you need when you're doing dungeons and stuff when you figure out your character. Now, they also get battlefield maneuverability, which allows them to move, or mobility, which increases their movement speed while blocking by 60%. So they get a 60% increase in their ability to move around. Now, if you try blocking with a two-handed and moving, you move like a turd. This allows you to move like really well, so you can strafe around the enemy, doing abilities like your bash or using some of these other abilities. And you can fire these abilities off while you're holding block down, just to let you know. So you can do that and then get in a heavy attack, which you have to let go of block, but you can get a heavy attack in when the enemy is not doing something, giving your resources back. You can also pop this off every once in a while, giving you that, because it only costs 100 ultimate, and it gives you the blocking to where you can just sit there and unleash a little bit of damage and then do some heavy attacks to get or use it to do heavy attacks to get resources back. So this is really beneficial. And like I said, you get the best Magicka damage shield in the game. So you get this one here. Now next is dual wield. Now dual wield offers a lot of great abilities for doing major burst damage or major damage. Starting off with their ultimate, they get Lacerate, and Lacerate slashes an enemies in front of them, dealing X physical damage over 8 seconds and healing you for 50% of the damage done. This is a really great ability, not just because of the damage that it does, but the heal it does. So it does damage and damage over time, so it's really cool. Now you have one that increases the duration of that damage over time by 16 seconds, or you've got one, a morph that does each enemy hit increases the damage you do. So the more enemies you hit, the greater damage it's done. Up to a maximum of 30% of the damage, 30% more damage done for each enemy. So that's something to think about, depending on how many enemies you hit up front. Next, you get Twin Slashes. Twin Slash is a really good ability because it slices the enemy with both weapons and causes deep lacerations, dealing X physical damage up front and additional damage over 9 seconds. So it does a bleed over time. Now this makes it really effective, especially if you're running 2 axes, and I'll get to that when we get to the down into the passes. So rending slashes increases the initial damage and reduces the enemy's movement speed. This is great for tanking because now you can apply that 9-second movement speed reduction by 50% along with greater bleed. Now the next one is really good for DPS. Now the reason I say it's better for DPS is because it also heals you while active, or it's good for a tank. So either one of these is good for tanking or DPS. Now if I'm playing a tank, I am not going to use the next ability, maybe, or maybe not. And the reason I say that is because I want something that's going to do some damage, but I'm going to use something that's going to heal me with a heal over time. Now this one has a heal over time, It lasts for the duration, the 9 seconds, and it heals me every 2 seconds for a certain amount of health. Now the next ability, Flurry, you flood the enemy with steel, battering them with doing 5 consecutive attacks and dealing X amount of damage. Now that damage gets bigger with the final attack by 300%. So the final hit you did hits for 300%. The initial damage is kind of smaller, and it's a channeled ability, so you do channel it when you do it. Next, more for it is Rapid Strikes. Each hit increases the damage of the subsequent hit. So each hit increases the damage of the subsequent hit by 3%. So every hit increases by 3% damage, up to the final hit of 300% damage. So it gets all that bonus for 5 hits. So 3 gets 15% more damage when this hits. So it's a greater damage dealing thing. And if you're playing DPS, you could take this heal and do this damage. And it's by choice, like I said. Next is Bloodthirsty. This is a really great ability because the final hit you do when it hits heals you for a certain amount of damage. And it's 60% of the damage caused. So you're doing 300% more damage with the last hit. You're getting 60% of that 300% back. So you get a lot of healing off of that, and it really does help you in the long run. The next one is Whirlwind. This is an AoE ability. Your character will just spin in the air, hitting on multiple targets. Launch yourself into lethal spin, dealing X physical damage to nearby enemies. Deals up to 100% more damage to enemies based on the percentage of their missing health. So the greater health, the smaller their health pool, the more damage it does. Now the next two abilities are where tanking and DPS play. Whirling Blades is better for a tank, while Steel Tornado is better for DPS. And the reason I say that is because if you're playing DPS, you're going to be in medium armor, and this cost is going to be greatly reduced. In heavy armor, this cost is reduced, so what it does is it reduces the cost and grants major endurance, increasing your stamina recovery. So you can do this, getting that increased stamina recovery, so next heavy attack you do, you get 20% more, and it lasts for 10 seconds. So that's where you can get some extra stamina recovery on your character. You only need to fire this off every once in a while. You're not going to be spamming it like a DPS. A lot of DPS do. They spam this and they spam Bloodthirst. And the reason why is because of all that healing. Now as a tank, you don't want to spam it. You're using it to get that stamina recovery for resource management. So that's where that benefit comes into play. And this one here, it just has an increased radius, so it does a lot more damage in a bigger area. Next one is Blade Cloak. Now, even playing DPS or playing a tank, this one comes into play really well. And the reason why it comes into play really well is it creates a ring of razors around you, dealing X physical damage to all nearby enemies every 3 seconds for 15 seconds. Now, this is a 15-second thing, and it does a lot of damage, trust me, because it's based on max stamina and weapon damage. So the higher the max stamina and the higher weapon damage, the more damage it'll do. So for DPS, it's really great. On top of that, the razors also shield you from shrapnel, reducing damage you take from area of effect attacks by 20%. Now remember, you can get a thing in your champion points that reduces the amount of damage you take from area of effect. Along with this, that's going to give you greater damage reduction from area of effect abilities, and I think that's really good. Next is Quick Cloak, and then you have Deadly Cloak. Now Quick Cloak is a really good one for DPS so they can move around the battlefield, but I think it's more efficient for a tank to have because it allows them to move around the fight and manage the boss better or manage the enemies better, because then they can go into a room, they have their Quick Cloak up, they're hitting multiple enemies, doing doing damage to them, grabbing their attention, because there's this thing called damage aggro. So the more damage you do, the more aggro you generate. So if you're doing a lot more damage than your DPS right off the bat, you're going to gain the aggro. You're also going to not allow the heals to affect the healer pulling aggro. So that's something to do. Now Deadly Cloak increases the damage. So you have your choice here in either one of these. You're always going to get that 20% damage reduction, but this one's going to give you major expedition for 5 seconds. So you fire this before you go into a room, you go running in, you get that, you know, that quicker speed to get into the room so your DPS don't get ahead of you, because that's really annoying. So you get into the room, you get that aggro, and then you maintain it by taunting them with your taunt. And you can get a taunt without having sword and board. We'll get to that as well. So you got those two choices. Next is Hidden Blade. Now this is where you can get major brutality for a Templar, is by using this. If your class doesn't offer you major brutality, you can use Hidden Blade to get it. Now this one fires a secret dagger from your sleeve at an enemy, dealing X physical damage and reducing their movement speed by 50%. Also grants major brutality, increasing your weapon damage by 20% for 20 seconds. Now remember, Templars get 6% weapon damage. Now if you ran 2 swords, you would get 5% extra weapon damage on top of that, giving you 31% extra weapon damage as a Templar. As a DK, you're going to get 30% extra weapon damage if you're running swords. So just saying. Now you got 2 morphs. You got Shrouded Daggers and you got Flying Blade. Now Shrouded Daggers fires a secret dagger. The dagger bounces up to 2 times, dealing increased damage with each bounce. So it does more damage the more bounces it does. The other one does increase the damage and range altogether. So you get greater increase in damage and you get a greater range. This is a great way to pull enemies too, or to get their attention, because you can throw the dagger. And if you notice, this one costs more stamina for some reason in this screen. I don't know if that's the case in the actual game, because I don't have this version. I actually run this version if I'm going to run dual wield tanky. And this way, it's a cheaper cost, and it is a lot cheaper cost, let me tell you. So you can hit this from a range. You can hit a target with it to grab their attention. If they're targeting like a spellcaster and they're going to target your healer, you can hit this off. It's going to do greater damage, so it's going to grab their attention and turn it towards you. So you don't have to waste your taunt. You can just do that. Next is the passives. You get Slaughter up front. The first one increases the damage with dual wield abilities by 20% against enemies under 25% health. Now remember, if you're playing a tank, you're going to get that 5% extra damage to your light and heavy attacks. This is going to give you 25 extra added to the 30% you already have. So when you do damage, then you're going to be doing 50% more damage all the time. So it's really, really effective. Next, you get Dual Wield. Expert increases weapon damage by 6%. So now that 31% is increased to 60 or 37% extra damage that I can do with as Templar, and as a tank, as a Dragon Knight, you get 6% based off the damage of the offhand, and that's if you're running dual swords, and we'll get down to that here in a second. The next one is Controlled Flurry, reduces the cost of dual wield abilities by 20% stamina. Like I said, it's really beneficial because that's going to reduce these things' cost. If you're in medium armor, you're going to get greater reduced cost. And if you're in heavy armor, you can get an extra 10% easy, giving you 20 or 30% in total reduced cost in your dual wield abilities. So they're not going to cost as much. Next, you have Ruffian. Gives you a 15% damage bonus when attacking stunned, immobilized, disorientated, or silenced enemies. Now remember this, because depending on what class you're playing, you get silence, you can stun enemies, and you can immobilize enemies really well depending on what abilities you use. This increases your damage potential against those enemies by 15%. Now comes the bread and butter, Twin Blade and Blunt. Now this gives you a benefit based on each weapon type. Axes, each axe will give you 8% chance to bleed enemies, so 16% in total. Now you got to think, if you're using this and you're using still Tornado, there's a chance you're going to hit multiple enemies with that bleed. If you use Twin Slashes, you can apply a double bleed. So there's a lot of different things you can do with axes that makes it super beneficial. The next one after that is each mace you equip causes you to ignore 10% of the enemy's physical resistance. These same bonuses, now remember, axes here, you get the same bonus in two-handed as you do in dual wield. So the only thing you don't get in two-handed is, of course, daggers. But you do get this 8 or 16% chance to bleed with a two-handed. This is 20% with maces. And then each sword increases your damage done by 2.5%. So that means that with two swords you get 5% more damage. So that's a choice you get to make. Do you want to do greater weapon damage, or do you want to do greater, spell damage? Because this just increases the damage, the total damage, by 5%. This increases the weapon damage by 6%. So you get that difference there. Now, each dagger increases your weapon critical rating. So this isn't, if you're using sharpened daggers, you're going to get 10% more if you're using two critical. So this is why you can get almost 100% crit rating wearing medium armor and as a Nightblade, is because of that. So Nightblades excel with critical. This is a good way to get extra critical on them and allow you to do more damage. Now, if you're playing like a tank, like a heavy armor DPS, let's say, because you can play a heavy armor damage dealer and be really good at it, you're going to be using other class abilities, or you're going to be using not just class abilities, but you're going to use other abilities from other guild things, which we'll get into another video. They will give you also increased critical, so you can get greater damage even using heavy armor. The next is the bow. Now the bow is a really misused item, because a lot of people think that you've got to use this on back bar only. You can't run just a solid bow. Now I'm going to show you where you can run a solid bow, because depending on what class you play, especially if you play a DK, they get increased poison damage. Well, the bow gets a lot of poison abilities. And if you play a Nightblade, you get extra critical. So there's a lot of things you can do to increase your character's damage potential depending on what class you are. And you're going to gain more benefits with a bow playing Nightblade, because they can do stealth. And remember, Wood Elves and Khajiit get extra stealth bonuses when they attack from stealth with bow or daggers. So they're going to get that increase. Now, running just a solid bow gives you a lot of benefits. Their first thing is their ultimate, of course, which is rapid fire. Unleash a barrage of arrows at an enemy, dealing X damage over 4.1 seconds. You do one attack, it does so much damage, like every attack is like just a ton of damage that you can do. You can move at full speed while channeling this attack. So you can move and fire. So you make Legolas look like freaking Robin Hood, okay? And the only other elf in the world of movies or video games that is even going to come close to you is from an old movie called Hawk the Slayer, where this elf could fire like 50 arrows in a matter of seconds. And that's the only elf I know of that can do it. And that's pretty much what you'll be able to do. Now they get two versions here, two morphs. They get Toxic Barrage, deals poison damage after the barrage ends. You poison the enemy, dealing additional damage over time. And depending on your max stamina and your max weapon damage, this damage can be super high. Trust me. I've seen mine up to almost 20 something, like 24k. So that was crazy. On top of that, you can get Ballista. Now Ballista is more for a tanky type person. I wouldn't use this if I was a damage dealer. I'd use this if I was tanking with a bow. And yes, you can do that. But basically, you drop a turret on the ground that does rapid fire for you, so you can do your other bow abilities doing extra damage as well. So it's a great way to get some extra damage in while tanking. But I would not suggest running it, because you're going to want to use something that mitigates damage more than you're going to want to use something that does that. Next up is Poison Arrow. Again, another poison ability. Shoots an arrow coated with Bandari poison at an enemy, dealing X poison damage and additional poison damage over 10 seconds. Now, I have seen some players that have like a 40k stamina, and this poison arrow will hit for a S-ton, okay? A lot of damage. And it doesn't cost a lot of stamina to do this, and you're also going to get a 20% stamina reduced cost in this in their passives as well. So you get two choices here. You get Venom Arrow and you get Poison Injection. Now Venom Arrow, look what it does. If an enemy is hit casting an ability, they are interrupted and set off balance and stunned. Who better to use it than a tank? No offense. Poison Injection, the damage over time deals additional damage to low health enemies. Now this is really good, because the lower the health, the more damage it will do. Now, if you're playing a tank, this isn't going to be beneficial to you as much as this one, where you can disorientate and set them off balance, increasing the damage done by melee DPS because you interrupted them, you set them off balance, and stunned them, so their damage with dual wield is going to be increased. So that's the thing you need, like I said, you need to understand. Now, poison injection is better for a DPS build because the damage over time deals up to 200% more damage to enemies under 50% health. So you can use this as an execute and blast the snot out of them, just saying. Thank you for the sound effects there. Yep, I'm proud of myself, thank you. Alright, next is volley. Launch a multitude of arrows into the sky and rain down, dealing X physical damage to enemies in the target area every 0.5 seconds for 8 seconds. That's a lot of damage you can do, and it does allow you to do some crowd control, because they have to move through that to get to you. So if you drop it right in front of you and you're in a hallway and you're tanking from the hallway, you can pull the enemies into that hallway with your bow, and it does a lot of damage. Now, Endless Hail, which was one of the morphs, increases the duration and reduces the cost. Great for tanking. Now, Arrow Barrage is something that's greater for DPS because it increases the range and the radius in size. Now, a lot of people use Endless Hail for DPS, which is great because it does do that. It just has a reduced cost and increased duration. This one increases the range, so that means it hits a bigger area doing greater damage to a greater area of stuff. Now the next one, Shatter Shot, has 2 morphs, but we're going to talk about this. Blast an enemy with an explosive arrow, dealing X physical damage, knocking them back 6 meters, and disorientating them for 5. So this is a great way to get the enemy away from you if you need to. Like if you're tanking, you want to knock an enemy back, you just do this. You hit them with this, you knock them back, keeping them away from your group and your allies while you're tanking the boss. It is a super effective thing. Now here's one thing I will tell you that I would not do if I was playing a tank. I would not use 2 weapons. Always stick to one type. Now if you're playing DPS and you want to do 2 weapons, that's your choice, but just remember, if you're going to get that extra 10% in the middle tree, you can't do 2 weapons. You can only pick one type to get that extra damage out of. So, because you're not gonna have enough points to spread and get those benefits elsewhere. Now with this, you get Magnum Shot and you get Draining Shot. Now Magnum Shot is a really great ability because you blast an enemy, it increases the damage, and it knocks the target away from you, or knocks you away from the target. So not only does it knock them back, but it knocks you back too. And it does increase damage. So this is really good for DPS that want to stay at range. They can do that. Now the next one is better for a tank, and that is Draining Shot. And what this does is it blasts an enemy with an explosive arrow, dealing the damage and knocking them back, disorienting them. But after the disorientation ends, you get health. So it's a good way to get health. You hit them with that, and you knock them back, getting you some health. So that way you can stay alive as a tank. And that heal is going to be greater depending on what kind of armor you're in. Remember, you get healing received. You're going to do that as a tank. You're going to want greater healing received. Next is Arrow Spray. This is a great crowd control ability, because when you fire arrows in one shot, you fire a burst of arrows in one shot. It's basically like a volley of, or a wave of arrows that you do in one shot. It does so much physical damage in front of you, but it also reduces the movement speed of the enemies by 40% for 5 seconds. Now you get 2 versions, 2 morphs, and one also immobilizes the enemies for a certain amount of time. And it still does the reduced movement speed. But it immobilizes them for 2 seconds. So you can immobilize enemies for 2 seconds as a tank, versus Acid Spray, which does poison damage to multiple targets in front of you. Deals poison damage and additional damage over time. So this is a great thing to know. When you get this, you can either apply the poison to them, because it's a tank, you're not looking to do damage. Remember, you're there to do crowd control and do things that are going to make you more of an effective tank. Bombard is better. So dealing poison and additional damage over time is really beneficial to DPS. Unless you're playing a poison tank, then this becomes something that can be beneficial to you. So there's a lot of reasons why you would use that ability versus this one. Snipe. Now Snipe is actually getting moved to the front of the list. It's going to be your first thing after your ultimate. It will be the first thing that you unlock. and then it will go poison arrow, volley, magnet arrow, and then arrow spray. So just remember that when the next update comes out, the housing update. So plant a masterful aimed arrow into an enemy's vital spots, dealing a big amount of damage. I mean, this is a super amount of damage. Now you get two versions. You get lethal arrow and focused aim. Now lethal arrow deals poison damage and applies poison status effect. Also applies major defile to the enemy, reducing their healing received. So this is really good to use because then you can apply that major defile to an enemy, and it lasts for 10 seconds. So it reduces their healing received. Now remember, if you're fighting certain boss encounters, this is going to be great for you. Now the next one is a really good one for a tank, because you mark an enemy hit, allowing you to hit them from further away and inflicting them with minor fracture, reducing their physical resistance. So it gives you a greater chance to hit them from further away, and it gives them minor fractures. So you can hit them with this first, and then hit your taunt from your undaunted line, taunting them, and they're going to have major fracture for 10 seconds. So it's super beneficial to use this as a tank, because then you can apply that every 10 seconds and hit them with major fracture and your taunt. Just rotate the two, because you're going to be moving around on the battlefield using a bow. You're not going to be staying up front like right at the boss or something. You're going to move around the room, fighting them, dragging them around, or you're gonna lock yourself in place, and you're going to use a lot of damage shields to mitigate the damage while you're using a bow. Next up is their passives. The first passive is long shots, gives you damage bonus up to 12% against enemies at a longer range. So at the greater range, you're going to do more damage. Accuracy increases weapon critical by 1095. This is 5% extra critical chance. So you get greater critical with this with a bow. Now just imagine being a Nightblade bow person using a lot of poison damage. Yeah, you're going to get a lot more critical damage off of it. On top of that, you get Ranger, reduces the stamina cost of the bow abilities by 20%, and then you get Hawkeye. Hawkeye is a really great ability because your successful light and heavy attacks increase the damage of your bow abilities by 5% for 4 seconds, stacking up to 3 times. Now remember what I told you about the spectral bow from the Nightblade thing? This thing affects that as well. So when you use that spectral ability, you got to do 4 light attacks in order to get it to pop out. Well, in that time, you're going to stack up this thing here. That means your light and heavy attacks are going to increase the damage of your next bow ability. So that spectral bow ability is going to be increased by 5%. It's a really beneficial thing to know. Next is Hasty Retreat. Now this one I love because it grants you a major expedition for 5 seconds after you using a dodge roll. So what I do a lot of times when I'm playing my character, when I was playing my character with a bow, I would actually use this dodge roll, run away, fire at a greater distance to get that greater damage, and then what I would do is as I got close, I would use my scatter shot. Or in this case, I would use my draining shot. So it would knock them back, and it would give me health when the disorientate that they get affected by ends. So it's a really cool combination of things that you can do with a bow, depending on how you play. Now, the reason I say it's better to go with a one-weapon thing when you're tanking is because you gain greater benefits in your champion points from using one weapon type. The same thing goes with if you're playing DPS. Using one weapon type, you get greater benefits, and so on and so forth. Now, you don't have to do that. It just offers you greater benefits, like I said. And it's up to the player to decide, not me. Next is Destruction Staffs, and this is a magic damage-based weapon. So you've got to have max magicka, and you've got to have spell damage in order for this thing to do a lot of damage. There's a lot of abilities in here that do cost quite a bit of magicka, so if you don't have reduced magicka cost, it will affect you more. So using heavy armor, remember there's some abilities in here you probably don't want to use too often. So starting with the ultimate, you get Elemental Storm. Create a cataclysmic storm at the target location that builds for 2 seconds, then lays waste to all enemies in the area, dealing X magic damage every 1 second for 10 seconds. Now, it is an instant cast, and it takes 2 seconds for it to build, and then it unleashes its damage. Now, you got 2 morphs, Elemental Rage and Eye of the Storm. Now, Elemental Rage gain a new effect type depending on your staff type. So depending on what kind of staff you're using, Flame, Frost, or Shock, you're going to get a different effect. Your fire damage staff is going to always apply burning. Your frost staff is always going to apply chill, and then your lightning staff is always going to apply concuss to them. Now, concussed allows any of them hit, it does damage to nearby enemies, I believe is what it does. Chilled slows them or freezes them, and then burning does damage over time. So you're going to get this with that damage over time with a fire staff. You're going to get the chilled effect. You're going to get the concussed effect. That's one of the choices you can go with. It is a great damage effect. It's like massive meteor storm, so it's really powerful. Next is Eye of the Storm, and this one, what it does is it casts the storm above you and follows you wherever you move. So this allows you to do this while tanking. So you can move around carrying that damage with you for 10 seconds, allowing you to grab more aggro. Now remember, it costs 250, so it's one you're going to use at the beginning of a fight or an encounter to clear up trash and keep the aggro on you, because the more damage you do, the more aggro you maintain. Like damage aggro. Next is Destructive Touch. Now this is the one that costs a lot of magicka, but it's because of what it does. It is an active ability. It's pretty powerful, but just devastate the enemy with an enchantment charge from your staff, dealing X magic damage and magic damage over 8 seconds. So no matter what, if you hit the enemy, it's going to do that damage to them over 8 seconds, depending on what type of staff you're using. If you're using Flame Staff, it's going to do fire damage over 8 seconds. If you use Frost Staff, it's going to do frost damage. If you use a Shock Staff, it's going to do shock damage. Now remember, DKs gain extra flame damage, Sorks gain extra shock damage. No class gains extra frost damage, but it is still really important to use this because the frost touch immobilizes the enemy. Now remember what I was saying about somebody using dual wield. As an ice tank, you get that ability to immobilize your enemies, allowing your DPS to do more damage to them, your stamina DPS. Next is the morphs, Destructive Clinch and Destructive Reach. Now, Destructive Clinch adds an additional effect to the elemental effect. Flame knocks back the enemy and deals more damage over time. Frost Clinch immobilizes the enemy for longer, and Shock Clinch stuns the enemy and deals damage to nearby enemies. Okay, that's what that one does. So you get that dealing damage to nearby enemies. So you get greater AoE damage with this. You get with the Shock Staff, you get greater damage over time with the Fire Staff, and then you get the longer effect of immobilization from the Frost Staff. That's why Frost Staffs are really good for tanking. Next is Destructive Reach, has increased range. That's it. So you get a more increased range with this one, and this one adds additional effects. So all these are really good for tanking, to be honest, or DPS. So you have that option. Wall of Elements is another great ability. Slam your staff down to create an elemental barrier in front of you, dealing X magic damage to enemies in the target area for every 1 second, and it lasts for 6 seconds. So what this does is it creates a path in front of you. It doesn't create an actual wall. It puts a path down in front of you that does damage over time, depending on the type of staff. Wall of Fire deals extra damage to burning enemies. Now, if you hit them with this first, you're going to apply burning, and they're going to be taking extra damage from this. Frost, Wall of Frost reduces enemy movement speed and immobilizes chilled enemy. So if they're chilled, you can immobilize them. Now remember, you're going to get greater effects based on what staff you use in your passives. Wall of Storms sets concussed enemies off balance. Now remember, you get greater DPS from dual wield to those kind of things. So remembering this stuff is really important when you're playing the game. Now you have two morphs. You have Unstable Wall of Elements and Elemental Blockade. Now Unstable Wall of Elements does offer some other effects. Unstable Wall of Fire. So the wall explodes when it expires, damaging enemies in nearby area. So if you have 5 enemies standing in that path, and it explodes, it does that greater damage to them. Next is Elemental Blockade, which increases the size and duration. Now this would be better for a tank character, where this would be greater for damage dealers. And I say this better for tanks because it increases the size and duration. So that means you can apply more this extra fire damage to the burning enemies. Now just imagine being a fire tank. You get extra damages also, fire damage also. And then if you're playing a storm tank, you get extra shock damage. So you get those greater effects there. And then of course with frost tanking, you reduce the enemy's movement speed and immobilize them, chilled enemies. So you get greater effect in a greater area with that. Now, Force Shock is a really great ability for people doing like wanting to get some fast bursty damage in there, but it focuses all elements and energies with your staff and blasts an enemy for X flame damage, X cold damage, and X shock damage. So it does all 3 damage types. Now remember, a high elf using this staff, they are going to do an immense damage because they get bonuses to all 4. Just saying. Crushing Shock interrupts spells, putting the caster off balance. Great for tanking. Now this one deals increased damage, and the damage is nearby enemies that are burning, chilled, or concussed. So it does greater damage. So if they're sitting in this wall, boom, boom, they're dead, kind of thing, because you do increase damage. This here, though, is greater for tanking, Crushing Shock. Next, you get Weakness to Elements. Now, this is a way of putting major breach on your enemies, giving you greater spell penetration. Now, if you're using a sharpened staff and wearing light armor, you're already going to have a 9,000 spell penetration. This is going to give you an extra 5,000 spell penetration, giving you greater damage potential. So as a tank, this is super beneficial, because if you're not wearing light armor, you can still get that 5,000 major breach on them. And that way your other DPS, magic DPS, doesn't have to cast it themselves. You are casting it for them. Now there's 2 morphs with this. One is duration is refreshed on the damage dealt. So this one you cast it. It's not going to cost you anything to cast it on the enemy, because it costs nothing. And anytime that they're hit by anyone doing damage, that effect stays longer and longer and longer. So the more damage they're taking, the longer the effect lasts. So you don't have to recast it multiple times. You only have to cast it once. Great for tanking. Now this other one is great for magic-based characters because it restores magicka. So while this effect is active, attacks with Flame, Frost, and Shock restore X magicka to the attacker. So this gives you a way of doing light and heavy attacks, throwing them in there, getting more damage, more magicka back when you do it. Now it doesn't work with the resto staff. It only works with the elemental staffs. So it's really beneficial to use this on your character, to use it to get resources back, because you can use light attacks then to get magicka back instead of having to use heavy attacks. And if I remember right, it's going to get leeching magic soon, so that means whenever it's hit, no matter what, for Flame, Frost, and Shock damage, it's going to give magicka back at 400 per tick. Right now it's based off of max magicka. Next one is Impulse. Release a surge of elemental energy to deal X damage to nearby enemies. Now this one has, like I said, it has a great thing for tanks and a great thing for other people, for non-tanks, for damage dealers. Adds damage over time. So this is great for damage over time players, because not only do you do damage to the nearby enemies, but you also do damage to over time, and it's going to be damage over time based on the effect of the staff. So fire damage, frost damage, or shock damage. And then you get Pulsar, which is really great for a tank, because you release the surge of magic doing damage, but you also afflict them with Minor Mangle, which reduces their max health by 10% for 33 seconds. Now that's super beneficial to a tank because you reduce the amount of health they have. If they have 1.8 million, reduce that by 10%. You reduce it by 108,000. I think, yeah, something like that. So you reduce their health by that much. That's really great. And remember, this Minor Mangle does that. And if you have Major Defile on them too, you also reduce the healing they receive. So you get those 2 things on them, you're doing greater effect on them. Now we're getting into their passives. Their first one is Trifocus, which kind of reminds me of Triforce. We won't even talk about that. But it grants a bonus based on the element used. Now the fire one, the fully charged heavy fire attacks deal 12% additional damage. So if you need to get resources back with a fire staff, if you do your heavy attack, you're going to do 12% extra damage on top of the 20% you already do, making it 32%. And if you're a fire tank or a DK doing fire damage, not only is it 12%, but it's even greater. So it gets huge. So you do a lot more damage with your heavy attack. So as a fire tank, that helps you do more increased damage. On top of that, your fully charged frost attacks grant a damage shield that absorb X amount of damage. So it grows based on, that shield grows based on your max magicka. So the more heavy attacks you do, the greater the shield you're going to get, the more chances you're going to have to apply that shield. Fully charged shock attacks damage nearby enemies for 100% of the damage done. So no matter what, you're going to be hitting multiple enemies for extra damage. So as a tank, like I said, this is a great, this tree here is great for you. Now as a DPS, this is also great for you because you get all these different ways of doing different stuff. This minor absorption shield is really good for a DPS if you want to run a frost staff. You know, get some crowd control going on, that kind of thing. Really good. Now, penetrating magic is a really good one. Allows the destruction staff spells to ignore 10% of the enemy's spell resistance. Now remember, you're going to have 15% if you're wearing light armor and using a sharpened staff. On top of that, you're going to get another 10%, or you're going to reduce their spell penetration by 15,000, but you're also going to get an extra 10% on top of that. So you will literally strip most enemies of all spell resistance. And it's always wise to go over the limit. The reason why I say it's wise to go over the limit, it means that you are going to be doing the greatest damage potential of everyone, no matter what. Elemental Force increases your chance of afflicting enemies with burning, concussion, and chilled status effects by 100%. So no matter what, you will get 100% chance of applying those effects on your enemies with the Destruction Staff. Ancient Knowledge, this will be changing. Right now it reduces the time it takes to charge a heavy attack by 10%, but it will be changing with the housing update. And the only change that I can really remember is the one for the Eye Staff, which is going to give you the same blocking reduction and block reduction and blocking effect that a shield does. So that is going to be super beneficial to you when if you want to tank with an ice staff. Then you can become a block tank with a staff without using the like absorption shields to mitigate the damage, because you're going to get a lot more damage mitigation with this. Fire staff, I forget what it gets, and I forget what the lightning stat gets, but they all get new benefits there. Next is Destruction Expert. Restores X Magicka when you kill a target with a Destruction Staff spell or weapon attack. So that means anytime you use that, or you bash them, or you knock them, you just kill them with a Destruction Staff, you are going to get Magicka back. So that's a benefit that the Destruction Staff gets. But the Destruction Staff is really good in any way you use it. If you use it for damage dealing or tanking, it's really effective. Now, I wouldn't run a healer necessarily with a Destruction Staff, but you could run Destruction on one bar and Resto on the other. And that is one of the benefits of running like melee weapons. Like if you run dual, like Sword and Board and Dual Wield, you can get greater benefits that way. Or you can run two-handed and like Sword and Board, or you can run Sword and Board and two-handed, or dual wield and two-handed, that kind of thing, if you want to. The only thing is that you've got to choose, like pick and choose what skills you want to use, but you can still gain that 10% damage from light and heavy attacks, and then the 20% from the other things, or 20% from light and heavy and the 10% from the others. It's all dependent on how you choose to play. Now we're going to get into the Resto Staff. Now the Resto Staff doesn't have a lot of damaging abilities. It has a lot of healing capabilities. And starting with their ultimate, they get Panacea, whatever, which is basically a massive heal. And it releases the rejuvenating energies of your staff to swirl around you, healing you and nearby allies for X amount for 1 second for 5 seconds. Now it's a low-cost heal, low-cost ultimate heal, but it heals for a ton. And then its morphs do some greater things. So here's what it does here. Your Life Giver releases rejuvenating energies, to heal, and then also automatically casts Regeneration, Blessing of Protection, and Steadfast Ward at no cost. So you're going to cast all three of these things plus that massive heal all at one time. Now the Life's Champion is a really good one for a tank. Any friendly target you heal gains major force and major protection for 5 seconds, increasing the critical damage done by 30% and reducing the damage they take by 30%. So this is a really good one for a healer to use, or even a tank to use, because you get that major protection on your group and that major force, giving them greater critical damage and giving them reduced damage taken. So if you're running a heal tank, you only need you to tank and heal, and you're going to have 3 DPS with you in a dungeon. And in that case, you're going to get greater potential of doing damage with your group with this one, where this one is going to offer you greater regeneration, blessing and protection, and steadfast ward at no cost. And so it automatically casts all three of those for your group. Now we'll see what those are here in a second. We're going to start with Grand Healing. Now Grand Healing is a heal over time, and you summon the restoring spirits up with your staff, healing you and nearby allies in a target area for X health and additional health every 1 second for 3 seconds. So it's a really good heal. Now there's two more in Illustrious Healing and Healing Springs. Now Illustrious Healing, it increases the duration. So it increases the length of time that it lasts. So it goes up by 1 second. So you get a 4-second heal. And remember that it's 1 second for the 4 seconds that you're going to get that healing go off. The other is Healing Springs. This one, what it does is you restore magicka for each friendly target initially healed. Now this is really good for a tank or a healer, depending. Now I prefer to run Illustrious Healing myself because I like that increased duration. A lot of people like to use this one, Healing Springs, because of that magicka return. But the thing is that if you're tanking, getting that magicka return is going to be more beneficial to you. If you're healing and getting that magicka back is going to be more beneficial to you. So you have an option here in this one, either tank or healer on either one. Now the next one is Regeneration, and this one, share your staff's life-giving energy, healing up to you or up to 2 nearby allies for X health over 20 seconds. Now you get 2 choices here. You get Rapid Regeneration and Mutagen. Now if you're running Rapid Regeneration, the heal over time is shorter, but ticks faster and more often. So it's more healing faster. The other one is Mutagen, and this one, if your allies are low on health, the heal over time is consumed and heal the enemy immediately and remove a harmful effect. So if they're below 20% health, it's going to blast heal them, and it's also going to remove a negative effect on them. So if they're burning, chilled, whatever, it's going to remove that. Next is Blessing and Protection. Now this is one, like it shows up here, you get Regeneration, Blessing and Protection, Steadfast Ward. So we already know what Regeneration does. Now let's see what Blessing and Protection does. Now this one, you slam your staff down in front of you, doing a heal, but it also grants Minor Resolve and Minor Ward. Now these are those things that give you extra physical and spell resistance by 1350. So if you have a healer running a staff with your resto staff in your group, you're gonna be getting that extra spell and physical resistance. So you don't necessarily need to use them from your class, but you still can use them because of the other benefits. Like if you're playing a Sork or you're playing a Nightblade, using Mirage or bound armor, you get those things. Now they do have 2 morphs, of course, a Blessing and Restoration and Combat Prayer. Now Blessing and Restoration increases the size, healing done, and duration. Now this, to me, is a lot better for a healer to use because of that. Now this one down here also grants Minor Berserk, increasing you and your allies' damage done by 8%. This is a great one, but it does, like if you're playing in a group, in a trial, I would say running one of each is good. But if you're playing a heal tank, this is going to be more beneficial for you and your group because you're going to be able to hit your DPS easier than anyone else. So you can do that, hit your DPS with that, just turn, focus, aim it, boom, get him, and then turn back to the enemy, and you're all going to have that 8-second damage. You're going to give your group 8 seconds of increased damage. Now, some healers do run this, and I don't blame them why. It's a great thing. It gives them all, the physical spell resistance. It does that 8% damage, damage done. So it's really beneficial that you have, at least one of each in a trial. Next is Steadfast Ward. Now this one, you call upon your staff's strength to protect whichever ally has the lowest health with a ward to absorb damage. The ward's strength is increased by up to 300% depending on the severity of the target's wound. So if the enemy is low on health and you use this, they're going to get a bigger shield. So, and it is based off of max magicka and max weapon damage, or spell damage. So max magicka, max spell damage. Then you have 2 morphs, Ward Ally and Healing Ward. Now Ward Ally shields ally and self. So you get 2 damage shields, 1 for yourself and 1 for your ally. It's really, really good, especially if you're tanking, or not tanking, but if you're just a healer. This is a really good one. Now if you're tanking, Healing Ward is your place to go. And the reason why Healing Ward is the place to go is because call upon your staff to protect whichever ally has the lowest health, healing them for a certain amount of thing. You're going to be the one with the lowest health, so you're going to be constantly get that. And then when your ward expires, the target is healed for more health of the ward's remaining strength. So depending on how much you have left on that shield, you can get them back up in health, kind of thing. Now you have Force Siphon. Now Force Siphon is one a lot of people don't use, but basically what you do is you bind an enemy with your staff's power and siphon life to you and nearby allies each attack against the enemy, restoring X health. So if you do this on an enemy, you're going to basically target them, you're going to put that on them, and anyone doing damage to them is going to get healed. So, and for you, the effect is increased by 150%. That's why I say this is really good for a tank, my personal opinion, because of also the benefits that it gives below. Now you get Siphon Spirit and Quick Siphon. Now these are going to be changing soon. They're going to be getting the Life Leech and the Magicka Leech. So this is going to give, also restores magic on hit, so you're going to get Magicka back and health back when you hit the enemy, and it's going to affect you by the increased effect I think is being removed. I'm not sure. Bind an enemy with your staff's power and siphon life to nearby allies each attack, but ability is cast instantly, so it's an instant cast. It's not when you have to channel. So this one is a lot better to use, and it gives you that instant health recovery constantly. It's a really good one for a healer to use. This one I'd say is better for a healer or a tank to use. Probably a tank because they're right up front. You know, they're trying to focus a lot of magic to doing damage. This gives them Magicka back whenever they do any kind of damage with their staff or with their spells. Now, they do get their passives, and the first passive is the Essence Drain. Now, Essence Drain, you gain Major Mending for 3 seconds after completing a fully charged heavy attack, increasing your healing done by 25%. You also heal yourself and a nearby ally to the target of 30% of the damage inflicted by the final hit of your fully charged heavy attack. Well, I will tell you this much. My fully charged heavy attacks hit upwards to 3,000, and they're getting 30% of that in health back. And then that the heal will be increased by 25%. So they still get that bonus, and it's pretty powerful. Next, you get Restoration Expert, which increases your healing done by 15% on allies under 30% health. So the lower their health, if they're below 30% health, the greater the heal you're going to get. Now, you also get Cycle of Life, which restores an additional 30% Magicka when you complete a heavy attack. They get a lot of resource management with this staff. So the more heavy attacks you do, the more resources you're going to get back. That's why I put 30%, or I put the 75 in like the tanking tree, because I want the damage there, and I only put 10% in the Magicka tree because it increases my heals for 10%, and it increases my heals by, you know, all this other stuff, my magic damage by 10%, it increases my critical by 10%, and then I put 27 points in the Bless, giving me 10% healing effectiveness. So I have greater effect on my character with that. I don't put anything into precision, by the way. So, and because of that, I can put a little bit more points into Elemental Expert, increasing the damage that I do. So I get both the increased light damage, and I get that increased spell damage. So I get both. Next is Absorb. Restores X amount of Magicka when you block a spell. So this makes them really, really effective tanks because they're going to use their stamina to block, but they're going to get Magicka back, which allows them to get more damage shields off, giving them greater effect. That's for tanking. Now, if I'm not tanking, if I'm just playing this, I will be blocking, trust me, as well, to get that Magicka back. Restoration Master increases healing with Restoration Staff spells by 5%. It's not much, but once you have like that 15%, you know, 10% from Blast, 5% from this, and depending on your class, you're going to get 25%. You're going to get Major Mending somewhere, and then you're going to get Major Mending from this as well. So you do get Major Mending from a lot of places, giving you up to a, you know, 35, 45, 50% healing done. So it's really cool that you get that with the rest of stuff. Rest of staff playing is super fun too, by the way. In light and heavy armor, it can be super fun. Now remember, in heavy armor, you also get extra Magicka back too. So you get not only 30%, but you get 50% as well, plus another 10%. So you get in total 90% Magicka back when you do a heavy attack. Now if you're using with the new changes coming to heavy armor later on, you'll only get 25% of the resources back, so you get 55% instead. But there's a lot of different ways you can increase that and stuff through your champion points. Now, if you guys haven't seen my champion point video, I would say to go watch it. I wouldn't expect you to watch it, but I'd say to go watch it so you can get some general ideas on how you can set your character up with your different weapons and how you can focus on getting more damage capability out of your character. But that's it for the weapon abilities, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please hit that like button. It'd be greatly appreciated. If you guys want to see more videos by me, you can subscribe to me and be notified when I post my new videos. But other than that, that's it for the weapons, guys. Until next time, have a wonderful week, and I will see you all later. Bye.